Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to our continuation studying the book of Acts. Here we are in chapter 23 and going into chapter 24 today. And Paul is under arrest. What does that mean for him? What is he going to face? What are his trials going to be like? That's kind of what we're studying today. So, excuse me, chapter 23, verse 12, the plot to kill Paul. Seeing how Paul at the time was in Jerusalem and what was he facing there. Then Paul being moved to Caesarea, and then chapter 4, the trial before Felix, and what was life like for Paul in that time period where he was stuck in Caesarea. What was he doing? How was he filling his days? Here's a map. Once again, a recap. We primarily are going to be in Jerusalem here, number 2, and then in Caesarea here, this port town, which we'll talk about today. All right, a little bit of review. So earlier, if you can remember back to our last lesson, Paul had returned on his third missionary journey, takes the route to Jerusalem, even though many of the brothers and sisters in the faith are encouraging him not to because they know it's going to be dangerous for him. Paul refuses. Paul wants to go. He meets with James and several other church leaders in Jerusalem. Remember, at this time, a lot of the apostles, they've gone off. They've spread out into the world in various different regions. And so James, the brother of Jesus, is the leader of the Christian church in the city of Jerusalem. He gets mentioned numerous times. Paul himself wanted to take this collection offering for the people in need in Jerusalem, and so he wanted to accompany that. He goes to the temple where he's going to sponsor 4 men in the completion of their Nazirite vows. And it's there when the Jewish leaders recognize him, or I should say some Asian Jews, meaning Jews from like the city of Ephesus, Asia Minor. These Asian Jews recognize Paul and stir up a crowd, and Paul gets basically put under arrest. A mob is ready to kill him. The Roman soldiers step in. They put him under trial. Paul goes first before the Sanhedrin. It doesn't go well. There's a big, giant uproar happening. The Roman soldiers are noticing this. The centurion's like, all right, this isn't working. And so he takes Paul out of there, puts him back in jail. And that's where we left off last time. All right, so verse 12. The next morning, some Jews, this is verse 12 of chapter 23. The next morning, some Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we've killed Paul." Notice, they went to the chief priests and elders, saying, "We've taken an oath, we're going to kill this guy." Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petitioned the commander, the Roman commander, to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here. So that's the plot, right? These 40 men take an oath. It's possible that these are those dagger men that we've heard about, these dagger men who are essentially terrorists, who are completely opposed to Roman rule. They want Jewish freedom. It's gonna lead to all sorts of messes, and really it's these dagger men that it's going to incite more and more violence, and eventually bringing the Roman hammer down upon Jerusalem, when Jerusalem will get destroyed in about 12 years from this point, something like that. Also notice that the religious leaders of Jerusalem are in on it, right? These 40 men who take an oath, they don't keep it to themselves. It's not locked up in a base. They go to the leaders of the land and say, hey, we're going to kill him. Can you guys help us do it, right? Call Paul with a pretext of getting more information on the case. And yeah, it's pretty awful what you're seeing. Well, let's go on to the next slide and see what happens next. So we're told then that the son of Paul's sister, so Paul's nephew, hears about the plot, and he then goes to the barracks, to the Antonia Tower, where the Roman legion is barracked, and tells Paul about it. Paul then goes to the centurions and says, hey, this young man, my nephew, he has to say something to the commander, the Chiliarch. And so he takes the boy goes then to, or the young man, I should say, goes to the Roman commander. And the Romans take the threat seriously, right? They know that Paul is a Roman citizen. Therefore, he's under their care, he's under their watch, and they would be on the hot seat if something bad happened to a Roman citizen, especially before a Roman trial ever takes place. So it would look bad, and so they take it seriously, and they're doing their job, right? They're doing what they need to do. They're going to protect Paul, and I think a little bit of common sense on the Romans' part here, because they're seeing just the lunacy of the religious leaders in Jerusalem who are acting this way towards Paul. So what happens? Well, Paul is going to be moved out of Jerusalem, out of the pocket of where the Jewish leadership has a lot of sway. They're going to move him to a place that's a little bit more secure for him, where the Romans have more sway. Now, the Romans, obviously, they are in charge, but it would be easier for something bad to happen to Paul in the city of Jerusalem. And so this Chiliarch, this leader of 1,000 men, this commander, he's going to say to Paul, all right, we're moving you. It's going to happen in the middle of the night, and it's going to happen now. So he gets 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen to meet them that night in order to get Paul safely moved out of Jerusalem and to Caesarea, which we'll talk about in a bit and why that's such an important city. And he wrote a letter to the governor, where Caesarea is where the governor lives. Claudius Lysias, that's the name of this Chiliarch, to his excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. Death or imprisonment, that's what the Roman soldier recognizes. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. Wisely, the Romans are going to send Paul away from the Sanhedrin and to the Roman seat of power in Caesarea. So there's 470 soldiers are going to carry out this task, all for little old Paul. So they're very much taking this threat seriously by these dagger men. The soldiers go with them. The foot soldiers, the spearmen, the 400 soldiers and spearmen go with Paul. For a little of the ways, they don't travel all the way to Caesarea. But the cavalry, they are going to, on horseback, take Paul all the way up to Caesarea to arrive at the Roman seat of government. So let's talk about Caesarea a little bit. It is a port town. We've talked about this in the past, but let me give you some more information. Named after Caesar Augustus, built up by Herod the Great, the same Herod the Great that was in power when Jesus was born, the same Herod the Great that built Herod's temple. Herod the Great built up forts all throughout Judea. And Caesarea quickly became the capital of the region. It quickly became the official residences of future Roman governors after King Herod the Great died. And that's where Pontius Pilate would have had a palace, for instance. That's where the governor Felix and the next governor Festus would have lived. It was in Caesarea, not in Jerusalem. So it was a very important city. It was built in order to please the Romans. I mean, that was kind of Herod the Great's thing. He wanted to ingratiate himself with the Romans. And so when he's building this before Jesus was born, he's building it with the Roman architecture, Roman styling, all of that in order to make Romans happy. And then Romans, they're happy to live there. And that's why it becomes the capital. All right, so Paul gets moved to the city, and upon arriving, the governor keeps Paul under guard. He knows that something is up with him. I mean, he arrives with 70 horsemen. That is not normal. And he keeps Paul under guard in the palace while he's waiting for the accusers. So we're going to go through the trial before Felix, Antonius Felix. We're going to talk about kind of what's going on, what are the arguments for and against, who's the judge, who's the jury, I shouldn't say the jury, but who's the prosecution. All of that we're going to look at with this trial. So let's talk about the judge first. Let's talk about Felix. Felix is an interesting character, I think. And it does help us to kind of nail down dates and specifics because we know of Felix from other sources. Antonius Felix was a Greek freedman, meaning he's not a natural-born Roman citizen. He's Greek. He's still obviously well-to-do. He becomes a governor. But the way he becomes a governor is, in fact, because of his brother. His brother, and his name escapes me. What his brother's name is escapes me. Oh, should have written it down. His brother came into power. He became one of the secretaries to the treasury in Rome, right? He controls the purse strings, and so he's got the Emperor Claudius's ear, and that's when Felix also becomes governor of this little backwards province of Judea. Not really your creme de la creme, but still, going from Greek freedman to Roman governor is a pretty big step up. Felix, however, isn't really good at his job. He is known for cruelty. He's married to a Jewish woman, Drusilla, I believe her name is. You see it at the end of chapter 24. I'll take a quick look. Yeah, Drusilla. And she's Jewish, so he's got connection to the people of the land that he's ruling. But he himself doesn't seem to be that good at what he is supposed to be doing. Under his reign, he also sees a really big increase in crime and terrorism. And go back to those daggermen, right? That he is not keeping the peace of the area. All right, so that's the judge. Let's talk about the prosecution. Prosecution, in this case, I guess it doesn't matter. The high priest, Ananias, right? The bigwig, the big guy. He journeys from Jerusalem all the way up to Caesarea. He brings some of the elders of the people with him, and he brings a Jewish man, who is studying to be a lawyer, or at least studying under Roman law. And so he should know what the case he needs to make before the governor, Felix. Their purpose, though, they know that this is no longer just a religious matter, right? Where Paul was being tried in the Sanhedrin over religious aspects, now that they're not in the Sanhedrin anymore and they're before a Roman governor, their purpose is to prove that Paul is violating Roman law and is therefore guilty of a crime punishable by death under Roman law. They also, as you can look at the arguments in chapter 24, heavily rely on the time-tested strategy of flattery. They really try to butter up Felix, talking about how great his rule is. But that's just not true. It just is not true what they say about him. And they actually do, I suppose you could say in verse 4, keep it brief, but in order not to weary you further with how great we think you are, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. All right, so that's the prosecution. You got Ananias the high priest, you got some elders of the people, and a lawyer, Tertullus. What are they actually accusing Paul of? Right, it's pretty easy to see what they're accusing Paul of when he's in Jerusalem and before the Sanhedrin, before the religious court. But what are they going to accuse Paul of now that he's before a Roman governor who is not Jewish and really doesn't care about the Jewish law? Well, they call Paul a troublemaker. Really, literally, they call him a pestilence, right? That he's a plague upon the world. That's the word that they use for him. They accuse Paul of stirring up riots all over the world. This Paul guy, look at everywhere he's gone. Look at all the riots that have followed in his wake. And we'll dissect these in a little bit too. They accuse Paul of being the ringleader of the Nazarene sect. Interesting choice of words there. Of course, you have Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus did a large portion of his ministry up north in the Galilean region. And then they also say that he tried to desecrate the temple. That last point's kind of interesting when you consider the accusation. What would the Roman governor care about this? Probably only care about it insofar as how it would affect others living in the area, right? If Paul's actions lead to riots or an uproar, and then he is to send in Roman soldiers, etc. Okay, so those are the accusations against Paul. Now, were these accusations actually crimes against the Roman law? Perhaps the best two examples of what they said could be the stirring up of riots. Right? This Paul character, he travels around the Roman world and he stirs up riots everywhere he goes. Well, he had just come from Ephesus, or not that long ago, I should say. He had been in Ephesus. And when he was in Ephesus, there were riots in the city, or near riots in the city, where the entire town gathers in the amphitheater and starts shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." You think of him being chased out of Thessalonica and Berea by crowds of people. But they also have to recognize that it wasn't Paul who started riots. It was the Jews living in those areas that started riots. And that's always how Luke words it, that Paul is not the one going out stirring up riots, inciting people to violence. It's always the people that he's preaching to, the Jews that have rejected his message, that have stirred up the riots and began to incite people to violence, usually against Paul. They also call Paul a ringleader of a sect, in which case Paul could be charged with advocating an illegal religion. Not all religions were legal in the Roman Empire, especially religions that detracted from Roman emperor worship. Is Paul, though, a ringleader of a sect? Well, he's an apostle. So I suppose you could say in some fashion, yes, he is a leader. But is he organizing vast movements of people to go stir up riots elsewhere? Of course not. Paul is preaching God's word, and he is calm and peaceful in doing so. He's not inciting anybody to violence, and that's certainly not something you see from the early Christians as they go and travel throughout the world. Violence is always directed at them, not the other way around. So, in short, were these accusations crimes against Roman law? I suppose if they were true, but the fact is that they're false, and that they have false witnesses to back up these claims, just like they did with Jesus, just like they did with Stephen earlier on in Acts. So what does Paul have to say to all this? Well, I'm going to break down a few of his points in chapter. This is all in chapter 24 if you're wanting to follow along in your Bible. Paul basically says they really can't provide evidence to support their claims. Right? They say I've done these things, but what's the evidence? I mean, what can you actually say that I've done? They've got these false witnesses here. But I was just in Jerusalem, and there wasn't a riot. I didn't start a riot. The only riot or uproar that existed was because I was there. And just being there, there were people who wanted to kill me. And he says that I admit that I am a Christian, right? I am a follower of the way. Those are his words, right? You call me a ringleader of a sect. Well, I am a Christian. He also says, but these Jews, they're not really so different from me, right? We have our similarities here. We both have hope in God. We both have the resurrection of the dead. We both know what is written in the law and the prophets. And Paul says also, I came to Jerusalem to offer humanitarian aid. My actual accusers from Asia aren't even here. He goes on further, right? Well, the humanitarian aid, right? He brings these offerings to help people. And then these actual accusers, these Asian Jews from Asia, they aren't even here right now, right? They should be the ones here standing before you accusing me of the crimes they think that they saw me commit. They think that I'm inciting these. Well, they're not here. In fact, you have the Sanhedrin that's here. You have the high priest who is here. They're accusing me of stuff that they didn't see me commit. In fact, if the Sanhedrin is here, they should be the one. They should accuse me on what they're actually upset with me about, which is their religious beliefs, the fact that I'm preaching Jesus. That's the reason that they're upset with me, and that's what they should accuse me of if they're the ones that are going to stand here. And Paul knows that this is a good defense because, you know, Felix, the governor, isn't going to care about a religious dispute. He's only caring about Roman law. All right, so what is Felix, how does he come down on all of this? Well, he first sends for the commander, the Chiliarch, which means the commander of 1,000, the guy who was basically taking care of Paul in the city of Jerusalem, the guy who sent Paul to Caesarea with those 470 soldiers, and he wants to hear what he has to say. And so he's going to wait until he hears from Lysias. And in the meantime, he begins to talk to Paul. He invites Paul to come and chat with him and his wife about the Christian faith. We're told he's familiar with the way, which is, happening all in his sphere of influence. So he's familiar with this new religion called Christianity. He wants to hear more. But at the end of the chapter, we also find out he has an ulterior motive in calling Paul frequently to listen to Paul's preaching. He says, we're told that he's really only looking for a bribe. Furthermore, when Paul continues to talk with him about the resurrection and Christ and Judgment Day, he tells Paul to be quiet, that he doesn't want to hear any more of it. Apparently, he had a guilty conscience, and he really did not want to hear more about what Paul had to say. All right, so 2 years pass, and I'm a little confused on the timeline here. Is it 2 years pass from here, or is it 2 years pass from the start of this? It's a little hard for me to gather the timeline here, but Paul's there at least for some time, and Felix never really takes up Paul's case again. Paul is able to have some freedoms in his imprisonment, right? He's not locked behind a jail cell, for instance, for these 2 years. But he's not allowed really to leave the city. He's not allowed to go on missionary journeys. He's not allowed the freedom that he would normally enjoy. But Felix just kind of lets the matter settle. He doesn't really address it again. He doesn't really do anything with it. And then Felix himself, in his procrastination of Paul's case, we find out that Felix is recalled to Rome. And in, I think, in 59 AD, Felix actually gets recalled to Rome to face his own charges of ineptitude, that he's doing a poor job in the Judean province because there's all these, there's this increase in crime and there's all this that's going on, that he's making a mess of the place. And so he gets recalled and a new governor comes in to take his place, a guy named Festus. And that really is where we are going to pick it up next time. We're going to have another trial. Festus is going to take up Paul's case, and he's going to have to make his argument again before a new Roman governor. All right, everybody, that brings us to the end of our lesson today. God be with you, and God bless you with a wonderful week. Take care, everyone.